"Honey, I used your mom's card, and it was declined. I was humiliated at the store." Melanie's voice shrieked through the phone while I listened to everything from the living room, my cup of still hot tea cupped in my hands. She didn't know I was right next to Paul when he took that call. She didn't know that every one of her lies was being heard on speakerphone. She didn't know she had just signed her own sentence. That selfish old woman humiliated me in front of everyone. She blocked the card on purpose. She kept screaming, with that over-the-top drama I already knew so well. Paul closed his eyes for a moment, as if processing something impossible to believe. Then he hung up without saying a word. 20 minutes later, my front door almost flew off its hinges. "Mom, explain this right now." Paul stormed in like a tornado, his face red with fury and his fists clenched. Behind him, Melanie appeared with swollen eyes, sobbing as if she had just suffered the world's worst injustice. "Your mother made me look like a fool. She blocked the card, and the cashier thought I was a thief," she screamed, covering her face with trembling hands. I remained seated in my chair by the window, motionless, watching them with a calmness that even I didn't recognize. Paul advanced toward me with furious steps. "Is it true you blocked your card, knowing Melanie was going to use it?" His voice was harsh, accusatory, as if I were the villain of this story. As if, after 69 years of life, I was the cruel and heartless one. I opened my mouth to answer, to show him the proof I had been gathering for months, to explain every lie his wife had woven around me like a poisonous web, to tell him everything I had endured in silence while they lived under my roof, ate my food, and planned to take everything my late husband and I had built with so much effort. But before I could say a single word, the door opened again. And when Paul turned his head and saw who was standing in the doorway, his face changed completely. The red of his anger turned to a ghostly white. His eyes widened so much they looked like they were about to pop out of their sockets. "Good afternoon," the person said in a firm, professional voice. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm here as we arranged." Paul froze. Melanie stopped crying instantly, as if someone had hit the mute button on a TV. The silence that followed was so thick I could feel it pressing against my chest. But to understand how we got to this moment, to understand why my own son burst into my house screaming at me as if I were a stranger, to understand why the woman who swore to love me like a mother was now looking at me with pure hatred in her eyes, I need to take you back 6 months. I need to tell you how it all began, how the peace of my home turned into a prison, how a mother's love transformed into my greatest weakness. Because this story didn't start with screams or accusations. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon, when I still believed my son loved me more than anything in the world. It was February, a month after I turned 69. The house was quiet, as it had always been since I was widowed 7 years ago. My husband, Richard, died of a massive heart attack one Sunday morning, leaving me alone in this 3-bedroom house we built together, leaving me with memories in every corner and photographs that smiled at me from the walls. But I had learned to live with the loneliness. I had learned to find peace in my routine of coffee in the mornings, my soap operas in the afternoons, and my needlepoint at night. I had my widow's pension, my savings tucked safely in the bank, and this paid-off house that was worth more than what many people earn in a lifetime. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. It was quiet. It was safe. Until the phone rang that afternoon. "Mom, I need to ask you a favor." Paul's voice sounded tense, tired. "Melanie and I are having problems with the apartment. The landlord hiked up the rent, and we can't afford it. We need to stay with you for just a couple of months, until we find something cheaper." My mother's heart melted instantly. Paul was my only son, the boy I raised for years by myself, while Richard worked double shifts. The young man I sent to college with my own 2 hands. The man I shaped with all my love and all my sacrifices. "Of course, honey. This is your house. You can come whenever you want." The words left my mouth without a second thought, without analyzing, without suspecting that I had just opened the door to hell. "Thanks, Mom. I knew I could count on you. Melanie is so stressed about all this. It'll be good for her to be somewhere quieter." He hung up quickly, as he always did lately, without asking how I was, without caring about my health or my life, just taking what he needed and saying goodbye. 3 days later, on a Saturday morning, They arrived with 4 large suitcases, 6 cardboard boxes, and an attitude I should have recognized from the first moment. Paul gave me a quick, superficial hug. Melanie greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that felt as cold as ice. "Thanks for having us, Sylvia." She didn't even call me Mom. She didn't even fake the affection I so craved from my daughter-in-law. She just said my name in that neutral voice you use when speaking to a stranger. "It's a pleasure to have you here," I replied with a genuine smile, still not seeing the warning signs flashing right in front of my eyes. The first few days were tolerable. Paul left early for work and came back late at night, exhausted and in no mood to talk. Melanie stayed home, supposedly looking for a job on her laptop, but I noticed she spent more time on social media than sending out resumes. I tried to keep my routine as always. I got up at 6 in the morning, made coffee, ate breakfast alone in the kitchen while watching the news. Then I'd clean the house, water my garden plants, and in the afternoons, I'd sit down to do my needlepoint or watch my favorite shows. But with every day that passed, I felt my space shrinking, that the walls of my own home were closing in around me. "Sylvia, could you turn down the TV volume? I'm on an important call." Melanie appeared in the living room with a scowl, as if I were committing an unpardonable crime. The volume was at the same level as always, the same one I had used for 7 years without anyone complaining. "Of course, sorry." I lowered the volume until I could barely hear the dialogue. She went back to the guest room without saying thank you. I stared at the screen, feeling a small pang of discomfort in my chest. The next day, it was the kitchen. "Sylvia, do you always cook with so much grease? It's really unhealthy. Paul has to watch his cholesterol." Melanie was standing by the stove, watching me prepare lunch like she was a health inspector. "This is how I've cooked my whole life." Richard loved my cooking. I tried to sound pleasant, but something in my voice came out defensive. "Well, times change. Now we know that excess fat causes diseases. You should try to update your methods a bit." She smiled at me, but her eyes didn't smile. Her eyes were evaluating me, judging me, finding me deficient. I set the wooden spoon down on the counter with more force than necessary. "I'm going to keep cooking the way I know how. If you don't like it, you can make your own food. Don't get sensitive, Sylvia. I'm just trying to help." She turned and left the kitchen, leaving me with a lump in my throat and a feeling of invasion I couldn't yet name. The following week, I found Melanie going through the drawers in my bedroom. I walked in and saw her with my documents in her hands, reading my bank statements as if she had every right in the world. "What are you doing?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. My heart was pounding in my chest. "Oh, I was just looking for a phone charger. I thought maybe you had one stored in here." She didn't seem embarrassed at all. She didn't seem to understand she had just crossed an unforgivable line. "My personal documents are none of your business. Please, get out of my room." I tried to stay calm, but my hands were shaking. "Relax, Sylvia. I wasn't snooping. Besides, this house is Paul's too, isn't it? Technically, he has a right to know how the family finances are." Her tone was casual, but her words fell on me like stones. "This house is mine. I bought it with my husband long before you ever showed up, and my finances are my private business." I took the papers from her hands and put them back in the drawer, locking it for the first time in years. Melanie looked at me with a cold smile. "Whatever you say. But eventually, Paul is going to inherit all this, so I don't see why it's such a big secret." She left the room without rushing, leaving me trembling with rage and helplessness. That night, when Paul got home from work, I tried to talk to him. "Son, I need you to talk to Melanie. I found her going through my private documents today without my permission." Paul didn't even look up from his phone. "Mom, it was probably a misunderstanding. Melanie wouldn't do something like that." It wasn't a misunderstanding. I saw her with my own eyes, reading my bank statements. "You're exaggerating. Melanie is stressed about the apartment situation. Give her a break." He kept staring at the screen, typing messages, ignoring me as if my concerns were worthless. "Paul, look at me when I'm talking to you." My voice sounded harsher than usual. He finally looked up, annoyed. "What do you want me to say, Mom? We're living here because of your generosity, and we appreciate it. But you can't expect us to walk on eggshells all the time. If Melanie went into your room, I'm sure it was without any bad intention. Stop looking for problems where there aren't any. I just stared at him, this 43-year-old man I no longer recognized. This child who once hugged me tight and told me I was the best mom in the world. This young man who cried in my arms every time he had his heart broken. "Fine," I whispered. "Forget it. Thanks. Now I'm going to take a shower because I'm beat." He got up from the couch and disappeared down the hall, leaving me alone with a new pain growing in my chest. The days turned into weeks. The weeks threatened to turn into months. And the temporary 2 months Paul had promised were no longer mentioned. No one talked about looking for an apartment. No one talked about leaving. Melanie had settled into my house as if she were the owner. She rearranged the furniture without asking. She threw out my old things, saying they were useless. She invited her friends over for coffee in my living room while I hid in my own bedroom so I wouldn't be in the way. "Sylvia, do you have some money you can lend me? I need to buy a few things for the house." Melanie appeared in my bedroom one afternoon with that fake smile that was starting to make me nauseous. "What kind of things?" "Cleaning supplies, some food, basic stuff." She held out her hand as if asking me for money was the most natural thing in the world. "I buy everything necessary for the house every week." "I don't understand what else you need." "Well, your products are very cheap. I prefer better quality brands. I'll pay you back when I get a job." Her tone was getting impatient. "If you want specific products, buy them with your own money." I kept my voice firm, though I felt my knees trembling. Her expression changed. The mask of kindness disappeared completely. "You know what? You are incredibly selfish. Paul told me you had money saved up and that you weren't lacking anything. But here you are, refusing your own daughter-in-law $20. You don't know me well enough to call me selfish. And I don't owe you any explanations about my money. You're a bitter old woman who's going to end up alone. When Paul realizes what you're really like, he won't want anything to do with you." She spat the words with pure venom and stormed out, slamming the door. I sat on the bed, my hands trembling in my lap. Tears began to fall, and I couldn't control them. How had it come to this? How had I allowed a stranger to enter my home and make me feel like an intruder in my own house? I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Paul and Melanie laughing in the next room. Laughter that didn't include anyone else. Laughter that excluded me from my own son's life. The months passed, and the situation worsened in ways I never imagined possible. Melanie no longer faked kindness. She no longer smiled falsely or tried to keep up appearances. Now she treated me with an open contempt that took my breath away every time. "Sylvia, I need you to give me your debit card. I'm going to do the weekly grocery shopping, and I don't have cash." She was standing in front of me with her hand out, as if asking for my bank card was the most normal thing in the world. "I can go do the shopping myself. I've always done it." I tried to sound calm, but my voice trembled slightly. "Don't be ridiculous. You take hours at the grocery store. I do it much faster. Give me the card and your PIN." Her tone allowed no argument. She spoke as if I were a silly child who didn't know how to do things correctly. "My card is personal. I don't give it to anyone." I held my ground, though I felt my stomach churning with nerves. Melanie narrowed her eyes. "You don't trust me? I'm your son's wife. We're practically family. What kind of mother-in-law distrusts her own daughter-in-law? The kind of mother-in-law who knows how to protect her money." The words came out before I could stop them. Her face turned red with fury. "You are a miserable old hag. Paul was right when he said you're controlling and suspicious. I can't believe we have to live under the same roof as someone so bitter." She spun around and left furiously, leaving me with a racing heart and a certainty growing in my mind. This was not normal. None of this was normal. That same afternoon, while they were out, I checked my things. I found that documents were missing. The deed to my house was not where I always kept it. My bank statements had been moved. Someone had been going through my papers again. I felt a wave of cold panic wash over me. I took everything important and put it in a lockbox that I hid in the back of my closet, behind old sheets that I knew Melanie would never touch because she considered them useless antiques. I also did something I never thought I'd have to do with my own family. I installed a small security camera in my bedroom. I bought it at an electronics store, telling the salesman it was to watch the cleaning lady. The shame I felt lying almost made me sick. 2 days later, I checked the recording, and what I saw chilled my blood. Melanie entered my room when I left to go shopping. She checked every drawer with methodical, calculated movements. She took pictures of my documents with her phone. She looked for cash among my clothes. She even tried to open the small safe where I kept the jewelry Richard had given me during our 35 years of marriage. I watched all this sitting on my bed, my hands shaking so much I could barely hold the phone playing the video. This woman wasn't just disrespecting me, she was investigating me. She was studying me like a predator studies its prey before attacking. That night, I tried to talk to Paul again. "Son, we need to talk. It's urgent." "What is it now, Mom?" His tone was pure annoyance. He didn't even pretend to be interested in what I had to say. "Melanie is going into my room when I'm not here. She's looking through my documents and taking pictures of my personal papers." Paul let out an exaggerated sigh. "Do you have proof of that? Or is this just your usual paranoia?" "I have video." I pulled out my phone, ready to show him the evidence. But before I could play it, Melanie walked into the living room. She must have been listening from the hallway. "What video are you talking about, Sylvia? Are you secretly recording me now? That's an invasion of privacy. I could sue you. I'm recording my bedroom, in my house, and I recorded you entering without my permission." My voice rose. That was rare for me. The anger was starting to overcome the fear. "Show me that video." Paul held out his hand, but his tone was skeptical, as if he had already decided I was lying. I gave him the phone. He played the video, with Melanie watching over his shoulder. The seconds ticked by. The silence in the room was as thick as smoke. When it finished, Paul gave me back the phone without looking me in the eye. "Melanie, what were you doing in my mom's room?" "I was looking for a sweater I borrowed from her weeks ago. Your mother is so disorganized, I thought maybe she'd put it away in some drawer without realizing it." The lie slipped from her mouth with chilling ease. "That's a lie. I've never lent you anything," I shouted, feeling desperation take over. "Mom, lower your voice. The neighbors are going to hear." Paul looked at me with embarrassment, as if I were the one doing something wrong. "Did you hear me? Your wife is lying. The recording clearly shows her taking pictures of my documents. I saw her take out her phone, but I can't tell what she was photographing. It could have been anything. Maybe she liked the design of your dresser and wanted one like it." Paul was clinging to any explanation other than the obvious truth. "Paul, please. Use your common sense." My voice broke. Tears were starting to blur my vision. "Common sense tells me my wife has no reason to spy on you or steal from you. And common sense also tells me you're becoming paranoid in your old age. Maybe you should see a doctor." His words were like knives straight to the heart. "Paranoid? That's what you think of me?" I could barely breathe from the pain in my chest. "I think you've been lonely since Dad died, and it's affected you. I think you should be grateful we're here keeping you company instead of accusing Melanie of horrible things." He stood up from the couch, ending the conversation. "I don't need company that steals from me. I need respect." The words came out as barely a whisper. "When you learn to respect my wife, we'll talk about respect." Paul took Melanie's hand, and they both went to their room, leaving me alone in the living room with my phone and my evidence that apparently was worthless. That night I cried until I had no tears left. I cried for the son I had lost somewhere along the way. I cried for the relationship I thought we had, which turned out to be an illusion. I cried for myself, for having been so naive, so trusting, so stupid. But when the sun came up, something had changed inside me. The tears had dried up, and in their place, something different was born. Something colder, something more calculating. If Paul wasn't going to protect me, I would have to protect myself. If my own son chose to believe a liar over his own mother, then I would take the necessary steps to survive. The next day, I went to the bank. I asked the manager to block my main card and give me a new one that only I would know about. I also requested that any unusual activity on my account require phone verification with me personally. "Are you having security problems, Mrs. Hayes?" The manager looked at me with genuine concern. "Let's just say I'm taking precautions." I didn't want to go into detail. The shame of admitting I didn't trust my own family was too great. The following week, while I was watering the plants in the front yard, my neighbor Laura came over. She was 72 years old and had lived alone since her children moved to another city. She had always been kind to me, but we had never had deep conversations. "Sylvia, can I talk to you for a moment?" Her voice was soft but serious. "Of course, Laura. What's wrong?" I set down the hose and walked over to the fence that separated our properties. "I don't want to meddle where I don't belong, but I've noticed some things." She glanced toward my house, as if making sure no one was listening. "I heard shouting the other night, and I've seen you looking very sad lately." I felt a lump in my throat. "It's just family problems. Nothing serious." "Sylvia, look at me." Laura put her wrinkled hand on mine. 5 years ago, my daughter and her husband came to live with me. They told me it was temporary. 2 months. That's all. It turned into 2 years of hell. I looked at her, surprised. Laura always seemed so serene, so at peace. "What happened?" "The same thing that's happening to you." They started by asking for little things. Then they started asking for more. My son-in-law began looking into my finances, suggesting I put the house in my daughter's name in case something happened to me. They made me feel like I was the bad guy, the selfish one, for wanting to keep my privacy and my independence. Tears began to roll down my cheeks, and I couldn't stop them. How did it end? One day I found my son-in-law trying to forge my signature on documents to sell the house. I called the police. My daughter begged me not to press charges. She told me I was destroying the family, but I threw them out that same day. Laura squeezed my hand harder. It was 3 years before my daughter spoke to me again. 3 years that hurt like hell. But they were 3 years where I got my peace, my dignity, and my house back. I don't know if I can do that. Paul is my only son. If I lose him, I'll be completely alone. My voice broke into a sob. "Listen to me closely, Sylvia. You are already alone. That young man you have in your house isn't your son. He's a stranger, manipulated by an ambitious woman. The Paul you raised, the one who loved you, he doesn't exist anymore. Or he's sleeping very deeply, waiting to wake up." Laura looked me straight in the eyes. "How much money have you lost since they arrived?" "I haven't lost money. I haven't given them access to my accounts. But they've tried to get it, haven't they?" Laura knew the answer before I said anything. "Yes. Melanie constantly asks me for money, and I found her going through my documents. Do you have everything well protected? An updated will? Documents in a safe place?" Laura spoke with the experience of someone who had been through the same thing. "I just blocked my bank card, and I hid all my important documents." "Good. That's the first step. Now listen, that woman is going to try something soon. Desperation will make her make a mistake. And when she does, you have to be prepared to act without mercy." Laura let go of my hand and took a card from her pocket. "This is the lawyer who helped me. His name is James Sullivan. He's good, and he won't judge you. Call him and tell him everything." I took the card with trembling hands. I don't know if I have the courage. Courage doesn't just show up, Sylvia. You build it every time you decide your dignity is worth more than other people's comfort. Every time you say no when they want you to say yes. Every time you defend yourself, even if they call you selfish. Laura smiled at me sadly. You weren't born to be anyone's doormat. Not even your own son's. That conversation changed something fundamental inside me. That night, while Paul and Melanie slept, I sat in the kitchen and called the lawyer. I left a message on his answering machine, my voice trembling but determined. The next day, James Sullivan called me back. He was a man with a firm but kind voice. "Mrs. Hayes, tell me what's happening." I told him everything, every detail, every humiliation, every invasion of privacy, every moment Paul had chosen Melanie over me. I spoke for almost an hour, and he listened without interrupting. "Mrs. Hayes, legally, you have every right to evict them. This is your property, and they have no lease agreement. But I understand that emotionally, it's complicated." His voice was understanding, but professional. "I recommend you start documenting everything. Record conversations if necessary. Save text messages. Gather evidence of anything suspicious." "Do you think they'll try to do something illegal?" I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. Experience tells me that when someone is that interested in another person's finances, especially when it's not their own money, The intentions are rarely good. Prepare for the worst and hope for the best. He paused. And Mrs. Hayes, I want you to know something. You are not doing anything wrong by protecting yourself. Being a mother does not mean being a victim. Those words echoed in my mind for days. Being a mother does not mean being a victim. My whole life, I had confused motherly love with infinite sacrifice. I had believed that being a good mother meant giving everything, putting up with everything, forgiving everything. But I was starting to understand that true love also includes self-love, that you can't take care of others if you destroy yourself in the process. That saying no doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a person with healthy boundaries. That week, something interesting happened. I received a call from the bank where I'd had my savings for 20 years. Mrs. Hayes, we received a request to change the beneficiary on your savings account. Did you authorize this change? My heart almost leaped out of my chest. What? No, I did not authorize anything. Perfect. The request came via email from an address associated with your account. But since we have a phone verification protocol for major changes, we called you before processing it. Who was the new beneficiary? Although I already knew. A Melanie Duarte. The bank officer sounded annoyed. This looks like an attempted fraud, Mrs. Hayes. Do you want us to file a report? Not yet. But block any changes on all my accounts. Nothing should be modified without my in-person authorization and identification. I was shaking with rage and fear. We will do that. And Mrs. Hayes, change all your passwords. Someone has access to your personal information. I hung up the phone and sat in my room, processing what I had just discovered. Melanie had tried to make herself the beneficiary of my own accounts. She had tried to steal from me using my own information. I checked my computer. I found the history. Someone had been in my email, my bank account, everything. They had used my date of birth as the password, something anyone who knew my basic information could guess. I changed all the passwords immediately. I put two-factor authentication on every account. I called Mr. Sullivan and told him what I had discovered. That is attempted fraud, Mrs. Hayes. With this, we could press criminal charges. His voice was serious. I don't want to go there yet, but I need everything documented in case things get worse. Understood. I will prepare all the necessary documents for an eviction notice. They will be ready for when you decide to use them. James was efficient and discreet. In the meantime, keep documenting everything. That night, at dinner, I watched Melanie. She ate peacefully, smiling at Paul, acting as if she hadn't tried to rob me just hours earlier. The ease with which she lied, with which she faked, gave me chills. The following days were ones of silent observation. I had learned to move through my own house like a ghost, seeing everything, hearing everything, documenting everything. Melanie didn't know her fraud attempts had been blocked. She didn't know I was several steps ahead. I watched her get frustrated as she checked her phone constantly, probably waiting for a confirmation from the bank that would never arrive. I saw her muttering things to Paul in a low voice when they thought I wasn't listening. I saw her look at me with that barely concealed hatred she no longer bothered to hide. One afternoon, while I was pretending to sleep in my room, I heard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. Your mother is tougher than I thought. Melanie's voice came from the hallway, right outside my door. We should have had access to her accounts by now. We should be processing the sale of this house. Give her time. She's stubborn, but she'll cave eventually. Paul talked about me as if I were an obstacle, not his mother. We don't have time. The banks are already pressuring us about the debts. We need that money now. The desperation in Melanie's voice was palpable. How much do we owe, exactly? Paul sounded tired. $58,000 between the credit cards and the car loan. If we don't pay soon, they're going to repossess everything. Melanie let out a frustrated sigh. That's why we need to convince your mother to put the house in your name. Once it's legally yours, we can sell it and get out of this mess. My heart was beating so hard I was afraid they could hear it. So that was it. It wasn't just about a place to live. It was about money, my house. About everything Richard and I built over decades of honest work. I don't know if I can convince her. She's been very withdrawn lately, very suspicious. Paul sounded defeated. Because you're too soft on her. You need to press her harder. Make her feel guilty. Remind her you're her only son, that everything she has will be yours someday anyway. Make her understand it would be easier for everyone if she just does it now. Melanie spoke as if she were giving instructions on how to manipulate a stranger, not her husband's mother. I don't know, Melanie. It feels wrong. You know what feels wrong? Losing everything because your mother is a selfish old woman who prefers to hoard money she doesn't need while we drown in debt. Her voice rose, full of venom. She's alone. She has no one else. What does she need such a big house for? What does she need so much money in the bank for? She's going to die soon anyway. The silence that followed was deafening. I waited for Paul to confront her. I waited for him to defend his mother. I waited for him to show even a shred of the decency I raised him with. You're right. I'll talk to her tomorrow. Paul's words were like daggers straight to my heart. I heard their footsteps fading down the hall. I lay in the darkness of my room, silent tears rolling down my cheeks. My son had just agreed to manipulate me to steal from me. My son had just agreed that my death would be convenient for his financial plans. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, making a mental list of everything I needed to do. Call the lawyer. Expedite the eviction papers. Change my will immediately. Make sure not 1 cent of my money went to them. But I also made a more immediate decision. If Melanie wanted my card so desperately, if she was so sure she could use me, then I would give her exactly what she deserved. The next day, I went to the bank again. I need to report my card as lost, I told the officer, and I need to activate maximum security alerts. I suspect someone might try to use it. The woman looked at me with concern. I know someone is going to try to use it. My voice was firmer than I felt. I want any attempted use to generate an immediate alert and for the card to be publicly declined. We can do that. We can also set it to freeze automatically at any transaction. The officer typed quickly into her computer. Are you in danger, Mrs. Hayes? I'm taking precautions. I didn't want to say more. I returned home with the old card in my purse. I left it strategically in my bedroom, inside my wallet, in a place where Melanie could easily find it if she went snooping again. It was a trap, and I knew she would fall for it. That same afternoon, Paul approached me in the living room. He had that uncomfortable expression of someone who is about to do something they know is wrong. Mom, we need to talk about something important. He sat across from me, his hands clasped together. Tell me, son. I kept my voice neutral, though I already knew exactly what he was going to say. Melanie and I have been thinking about the future. About your future. He avoided looking me directly in the eye. You're not getting any younger, Mom, and this house is very big for one person. The upkeep must be expensive. I managed just fine. My tone was cold. Yes, but what if you got sick? If you needed help, and no one was here? He was using the script he'd rehearsed with Melanie. We thought, maybe it would be better if you put the house in my name. That way, if anything happens to you, there wouldn't be any legal complications. And we could take care of everything. Take care of selling it, you mean? The words came out sharper than I intended. No, Mom. It's not about that. But his guilty expression gave him away. Paul, this house has 30 years of history. Your father and I bought it when you were 5 years old. You grew up here. You had your first loves here, your first heartbreaks. Your father died in my arms here. My voice broke slightly. And you're asking me to just give it away like that? It's not giving it away. It would be putting it in my name to protect it. You would keep living here. Nothing would change. Everything would change. It would stop being my house and start being yours. And then you could do whatever you wanted with it. I looked him straight in the eye, including selling it to pay your debts. Paul turned pale. How do you know about the debts? I'm old, not deaf, and the walls in this house are thinner than you think. I stood up from the couch, feeling a new strength in my legs. The answer is no, Paul. I am not putting the house in your name. I am not giving you access to my accounts. I am not going to make it easy for you to steal everything I worked for. Nobody wants to steal from you. His voice rose. You're my mother. Everything you have will be mine eventually anyway. But I'm still alive. And as long as I'm alive, my things are mine. I walked toward my bedroom but stopped at the door. And Paul, if you need money so badly, maybe you should look for a cheaper place to live. A place you can afford yourselves. You're kicking us out? The disbelief in his voice was almost comical. I'm suggesting it's time for you to be independent. You said it would be 2 months. It's been 5. My voice was firm, without a trace of doubt. I can't believe you're this cruel. We're your family. Paul looked at me as if I were some evil stranger. Family respects each other. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't try to steal. I closed my bedroom door, leaving him standing in the hallway with his mouth open. That night, I heard shouting. Melanie was furious. I told you to press her harder. I told you to be firm. But no, you had to be the good son. I tried, but she already suspects something. She knows about the debts. Paul sounded desperate. Then we'll have to take more direct measures. Melanie's voice was dangerously calm. If she won't give us the money voluntarily, we'll have to get it another way. The following days were filled with unbearable tension. Melanie no longer spoke to me directly. She just looked at me with a hatred so pure I could physically feel it when she walked past me. Paul avoided being in the same room as me. The house that was once my refuge had become a silent battlefield. One morning, while making coffee, I noticed my purse had been moved. I had left it in a certain position on my nightstand, and now it was at a different angle. I opened my wallet with trembling hands. The old card was still there, but I could see fingerprints on the plastic. Someone had taken it out and put it back. Melanie had found it. She had fallen into the trap. I checked the security camera footage I had discreetly installed. There was the confirmation. Melanie entering my room when I had gone out to buy bread, checking my wallet, taking out the card, photographing both sides with her phone, putting it back carefully so I wouldn't notice. I called the bank immediately. The card I reported as lost has been photographed. It's very likely they will try to use it soon. Understood, Mrs. Hayes. The system is set to decline any transaction and generate a security alert. The officer sounded professional but understanding. Do you want us to send security personnel? Not yet, but keep me informed of any attempted use. 2 days later, I was sitting in my living room doing my needlepoint when I got the call. Mrs. Hayes, there was an attempted purchase with your card 10 minutes ago at the Chic Boutique in the Sun Valley Mall. The transaction was declined for security. The amount was $1,200. My heart sped up. It had happened. It had finally happened. Thank you for letting me know. I waited. I knew Melanie would call Paul any minute. I knew the scene was coming, the drama, the accusations, and I was ready. I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang 15 minutes later. It was Paul. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. He called again. I didn't answer that time either. I wanted the desperation to grow, for the anxiety to eat at them. On the 3rd try, I finally answered. Yes? Where are you? Paul's voice was tense, almost hysterical. In my house. Where else would I be? You blocked your card. He got straight to the point. I have several cards, Paul. You'll have to be more specific. I kept my voice perfectly calm. The main card. The one you always use. I could hear Melanie crying dramatically in the background. Oh, that one. Yes, I blocked it a week ago. I reported it as stolen. I let the words fall like bombs. Silence on the other end. Then, Paul's agitated breathing. Stolen? Yes. Someone came into my room without permission and photographed it. The bank recommended I block it immediately as a security measure. My tone was innocent, almost casual. Mom, Paul sounded defeated. I have to go now, son. I have things to do. And I hung up before he could reply. I sat there, waiting. I knew what would come next. And I wasn't wrong. 30 minutes later, I heard Paul's car skid to a stop in the driveway. The front door flew open with such force it slammed against the wall. His heavy footsteps ran down the hall. Mom, explain this right now. His voice echoed through the house. He stormed into the living room like a hurricane, his face red with fury and humiliation. Behind him, Melanie staggered in with her eyes swollen from crying, makeup streaked down her cheeks. I remained seated in my chair by the window, my needlepoint in my hands, looking at them with a calm I had practiced for weeks. Your mother humiliated me. Melanie was practically screaming between sobs. She blocked the card on purpose. The cashier thought I was a thief. Everyone in the store was staring at me. They called the security manager. "You used my card without my permission," I asked in a soft, almost gentle voice. "You knew I was going to use it. I asked you for it days ago, and you refused. I just wanted to buy myself something nice because you've made me feel like trash since we got here." Melanie dried her tears with dramatic movements. "I don't recall giving it to you. In fact, I clearly remember telling you I would not lend you my card. I set my needlepoint on the small table, which means you went into my room, went through my things, and took it without permission. That's called theft." "It's not theft. We're family." Melanie pointed a finger at me, trembling with rage. "Family respects private property." I rose slowly from my chair. Family doesn't enter other people's rooms. Family doesn't secretly photograph bank cards. Family doesn't try to make $1,000 purchases with money that isn't theirs. Paul stared at me, his mouth open. "How do you know she photographed it?" "Because I have security cameras in my bedroom. And I have every moment your wife has entered without permission for the last 2 months recorded." I walked over to the cabinet where I kept my laptop. "Do you want to see the videos? I have a particularly interesting one from 3 weeks ago where she's trying to open my small safe." The silence that fell over the room was so thick you could cut it. Melania had stopped crying. Her face switched from fake sadness to pure rage in seconds. "You're a paranoid, bitter old woman." Her voice was distilled poison. "Spying on your own family? Setting up cameras as if we were criminals? Criminals go through other people's bank accounts. Criminals try to change beneficiaries on accounts without authorization. Criminals steal cards and use them to make luxury purchases." Every word came from my mouth with a coldness I didn't even recognize in myself. "I have evidence of all of it. Photographs, videos, documents." Paul sank onto the couch. "Mom, this is a misunderstanding. Is it a misunderstanding that you owe $58,000? Is it a misunderstanding that you asked me to put the house in your name so you could sell it? Is it a misunderstanding that I heard your wife say it would be easier if I just died soon?" My voice rose for the first time, loaded with months of accumulated pain. Paul went pale. "I never said." "No, you didn't say it. She did. And you agreed with her." The tears finally began to roll down my cheeks, but my voice remained steady. "My own son. The child I carried in my womb, who I nursed, who I cared for when he had a fever, who I hugged when he cried. That son agreed that my death would be convenient." "Mom, I never." Paul tried to stand, but I stopped him with a wave of my hand. "Don't call me Mom. A mother means nothing to you anymore. I'm just an obstacle between you and the money," I shouted with a force I didn't know I possessed. "I'm just a burdensome old woman who needs to disappear so you can live comfortably." Melanie took a step forward. "You know what? You're right. You are an obstacle. You have this huge house, and you live alone like a hermit. You have money in the bank you're never going to use. And yes, you do owe us help. Paul is your son. Everything you have should be for him. Everything I have, I earned. With my husband. With our work. With our sacrifices. I moved closer to her until we were face to face. I don't owe you anything. I don't owe either of you anything, and you won't get a single cent while I'm alive." "Well, let's hope that's not for much longer then." Melanie spat the words with pure hatred. It was at that exact moment that the front door opened. We all spun around at the same time. In the doorway stood James Sullivan, my lawyer, with his black briefcase in his hand and a serious expression on his face. Behind him stood 2 police officers in immaculate uniforms. "Good afternoon," James said in a firm, professional voice. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm here as we arranged. I brought the officers you requested." Paul froze completely. His face went from furious red to a deathly white in a second. Melanie staggered back several steps, her eyes as wide as saucers. "What? What's going on here?" Paul could barely articulate the words. I turned to look at him. In his eyes, I saw fear. I saw confusion. But most of all, I saw the exact moment he understood that he had completely underestimated his mother. What's happening is that I finally learned to protect myself. My voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of months of suffering. What's happening is that I documented every one of your lies, every invasion of privacy, every attempted theft and fraud. James walked into the living room with confident steps, followed by the two officers who stood by the door. The presence of law enforcement completely changed the energy in the room. This was no longer just a family argument. This had become something official, something serious, something with real consequences. Mrs. Hayes. James opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I brought the documents you requested. The eviction notice is ready. It just needs your signature. Paul staggered up from the couch. Eviction notice? Mom, you can't do this. I'm your son. A son who conspired to rob me. A son who listened to his wife wish me dead and said nothing. A son who stopped being my son months ago. My voice didn't tremble. I had cried all the tears I had during the lonely nights. Now, only cold determination remained. Officer, Melanie addressed the police, her voice trembling. This woman is throwing us out on the street for no reason. She has mental problems. She's paranoid. She sees things that aren't there. One of the officers, a man in his 40-somethings with a serious expression, took out a small notepad. Ma'am, do you have a lease agreement with the owner of this property? Melanie opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Paul quickly intervened. We're family. We don't need a contract. She invited us to stay. An invitation that had a time limit, I replied firmly. 2 months, you said. It has been 5. And during that time, you have tried to illegally access my bank accounts. You have stolen my credit card, and you have repeatedly entered my room without permission. Those are serious accusations, ma'am, said the second officer, a young woman with her hair pulled back. Do you have proof of this? James stepped in before I could answer. We have security videos showing Mrs. Duarte entering our client's private bedroom without authorization. We have bank records confirming a fraudulent attempt to change the beneficiary on her savings accounts. And we have the security report from the boutique where a stolen bank card was just used hours ago. He took documents from his folder and showed them to the officers. They reviewed the papers carefully, glancing occasionally at Melanie and Paul. Furthermore, I continued, feeling the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I have audio recordings where Mrs. Duarte and my son openly discuss how to convince me to put my house in his name so they can sell it and pay their debts. Debts that amount to $58,000, by the way. Paul collapsed back onto the couch, covering his face with his hands. Oh my God. Mom, I never wanted it to come to this. But it did. And it was because of your decisions, Paul. Because of your cowardice. Because of your greed. The words hurt to say, but they were necessary. For 5 months, I endured humiliation, invasions, disrespect. For 5 months, I tried to keep the peace because I didn't want to lose my only son. But you both gave me no other choice. Melanie finally found her voice, now full of desperation. This is ridiculous. You can't just kick us out. We need time to find another place. You had 5 months of time, James replied with professional coldness. 5 months of living rent-free while planning to defraud Mrs. Hayes. Considering the circumstances, she is being extraordinarily generous by not pressing criminal charges. Those last words hit like a bomb. Melanie visibly paled. Criminal charges? Attempted bank fraud. Identity theft. Unauthorized use of a credit card. Unlawful entry. James ticked off the charges on his fingers. Each of these crimes carries prison time, Mrs. Duarte. Mrs. Hayes could ruin your life with a single call to the district attorney. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, my own ragged breathing. Paul finally lifted his head. His eyes were red, his face destroyed. Mom, please, I'm begging you, don't do this. I know I screwed up. I know I failed you. But I'm your son. Give me a chance to fix things. For a moment, just for a brief moment, I felt my resolution waver. He was my son, the baby I had held in my arms. The little boy who had run to hug me every day I picked him up from school. The young man who had introduced me to Melanie with eyes shining with love. But then I remembered the conversation I had overheard. She's going to die soon anyway. I remembered his cold eyes when he dismissed my concerns about Melanie. I remembered how he had called me paranoid, selfish, cruel. I remembered how he had chosen this woman over me, Time and time and time again. There are no more chances, Paul. My voice came out broken but firm. I've used up all the chances. I've used up all my patience. I gave all my love, and you both trampled on it as if it was worthless. So, you're really kicking us out? It wasn't a question. It was the acceptance of a reality that was finally crashing down on him. I'm giving you 24 hours to pack your things and leave. I looked at James, who nodded, confirming it was a reasonable deadline. By this time tomorrow, I want this house empty of everything that belongs to you. And where are we supposed to go? Melanie had gone from rage to tears, but her tears no longer moved me. I had seen too many fake tears. That is not my problem. You should have thought of that before you tried to rob me. I crossed my arms, maintaining my physical and emotional distance. Officer, Paul turned desperately to the police. There has to be something you can do. We can't end up on the street. The female officer shook her head. Sir, this is private property, and you have no legal right to it. The owner is within her rights to ask you to leave. If you do not do so voluntarily within the established time frame, we will have to escort you out. Furthermore, the male officer added, considering the gravity of the accusations, I suggest you cooperate fully. Mrs. Hayes is being merciful by not pressing charges. I would not test her patience any further. James took out the eviction papers and placed them on the coffee table. Mrs. Hayes, if you're ready, you can sign here and here. I took the pen he offered me. My hand was shaking slightly, not from doubt, but from the magnitude of what I was doing. I was closing the door on my only son. I was choosing myself for the first time in decades. I signed with a clear, decisive hand. Sylvia Hayes. My name had never felt so powerful. It's done, James said, collecting the documents. The order is official. You have until tomorrow at 6 p.m. to vacate the property. Paul stood up abruptly. I can't believe you're doing this. After everything we've been through together. After I took care of you when Dad died. You took care of me? The laugh that escaped my throat sounded bitter. You came to the funeral. You stayed for 3 days, and then you disappeared for 6 months because you were too busy with work. You didn't call me on my birthday. You didn't call me on Christmas. You only showed up when you needed something from me. That's not fair. But his voice lacked conviction. You know what's not fair, Paul? It's not fair that a mother has to install security cameras to protect herself from her own son. It's not fair that she has to hide in her own house. It's not fair that she has to sleep in fear that someone will rob her while she sleeps. The tears finally began to fall, but not from sadness, from liberation. It's not fair that I spent 69 years being good, being generous, being loving, only to be treated like trash in my own home. Melanie let out a shriek of frustration. This is your fault, she yelled at Paul. I told you to press her harder. I told you to be more aggressive. But no, you had to be the good son. Shut up, Melanie. Paul looked at her with a rage I had never seen in him. This is your fault. You're the one who convinced me my mother was the problem. You're the one who made me doubt her. You ruined everything. I was trying to save us from your failures, Melanie screamed back at him. If you weren't so useless with money, we wouldn't be in this situation. The shouting between Paul and Melanie filled the living room. They blamed each other, revealing secrets and resentments they had kept hidden. It was painful to watch their marriage crumble before my eyes, but it was also revealing. Paul was finally seeing his wife for who she really was. Enough. My voice cut through the chaos. They both fell silent and looked at me. I don't care whose fault it is between you two. What I care about is that by 6 o'clock tomorrow evening, there is nothing of yours left in my house. James put the documents back in his briefcase. The officers and I will take our leave now, Mrs. Hayes. But if you have any problems tonight, anything at all, call me immediately. He handed me his card with an additional number written on it. This is my personal cell. It's on 24 hours a day. Thank you, James. For everything. I shook his hand, feeling a deep gratitude for this man who had helped me reclaim my power. The officers also said their goodbyes. We'll stop by tomorrow around 5 p.m. to make sure everything goes peacefully, the female officer said before leaving. When the door closed behind them, the house was plunged into a heavy silence. Paul and Melanie were still in the living room, like statues of salt. I stood by the window, looking out at the garden Richard and I had planted together so many years ago. "I'm going to pack." Melanie was the first to move. She walked toward the guest room with heavy steps, not looking back. Paul stayed for a few moments longer, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Regret? Anger? Pain? Probably all of it mixed together. "Mom," his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry too, Paul. I'm sorry things ever got to this point. I'm sorry I raised a son who values money more than his own mother. I'm sorry I didn't set firmer boundaries from the beginning." I turned to look at him. "But most of all, I'm sorry for the time I wasted waiting for you to change. Is there any way to fix this?" There was genuine desperation in his eyes now. "Not as long as you're with her. And probably not for a long time after that, either." I was brutally honest. "What happened here doesn't get forgotten, Paul. The trust you broke isn't repaired with a simple, 'I'm sorry.' So this is it? I'm not your son anymore?" His voice broke. "You will always be my son. Blood doesn't wash away. But being my son doesn't give you the right to mistreat me, to steal from me, to wish me dead." Each word cost me, but I needed to say them. "Maybe someday, when you've truly grown up, when you've learned what respect means, we can talk. But that day isn't today, and it probably won't be soon." Paul nodded slowly, tears rolling down his cheeks. It was the first time I'd seen him cry since his father's funeral. Part of me wanted to hug him, to comfort him like when he was a child. But that part was buried under layers of pain and betrayal. He went to the room without another word. For the next several hours, I heard the sound of drawers opening, clothes being shoved into suitcases, objects being wrapped. The sound of a life being dismantled. I stayed in my room, with the door locked. Not out of fear, but because I needed this space to process everything that had just happened. I had spent months planning for this moment, preparing myself mentally, but now that it was here, the reality was overwhelming. I sat on the bed I had shared with Richard for 35 years. "I did it," I whispered into the empty room. I finally stood up for myself. I wanted to believe he would be proud. Richard was always a man of principle, a man who didn't tolerate disrespect. Night fell slowly. I heard Paul and Melanie arguing in low voices in their room. I heard doors slam. I heard crying. I heard the sound of things breaking. But I didn't go out. I didn't intervene. It wasn't my problem anymore. Around 11 at night, everything went quiet. I assumed they had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from the emotional drama of the day. I, however, couldn't sleep. I lay awake in the dark, thinking about all the paths that had led me to this moment. I thought about the young mother I had been, so sure that love could conquer all. I thought about the widow I became, learning to live alone. I thought about the grandmother I never got to be, because Paul and Melanie never wanted to have children. I thought about all the years I spent being accommodating, saying yes when I wanted to say no, putting up with things when I should have protested. I had spent my entire life being the good mother, the good wife, the good neighbor. But at some point, I had stopped being good to myself. No more. The dawn arrived, painting the sky orange and pink. I got up, showered, and got dressed in my best clothes. If this was going to be the day I reclaimed my house and my life, then I would do it with dignity. I made coffee and ate breakfast alone in the kitchen, enjoying the morning silence. It was the kind of peace I hadn't felt in 5 months. No one criticizing my food. No one questioning my decisions. No one invading my space. Just me and my thoughts. Paul came out of the room around 9 o'clock. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes, and his hair was disheveled. He went straight to the kitchen, ignoring me, and poured himself coffee without a word. Melanie appeared an hour later. Her face was swollen from crying, and yesterday's makeup was still smudged on her cheeks. She looked at me with pure hatred before disappearing back into the room. The hours passed. Suitcases began to pile up by the front door. Boxes sealed with packing tape. Trash bags full of clothes. It was surprising how many things they had accumulated in just 5 months. At 4 in the afternoon, Laura knocked on my door. My neighbor came in with a hot casserole and a sympathetic smile. "I came to keep you company in these final hours," she said, putting the casserole in the kitchen. "And to make sure everything goes smoothly. Thank you, Laura. You don't know how much this means." I hugged her, feeling the support of someone who truly cared about me. You did it, Sylvia. You stood up for yourself. I'm so proud of you. Laura squeezed my hand. I know it hurts. I know you feel guilty. But you did the right thing. What if I was wrong? What if I'm a bad mother? The doubts I had been suppressing finally surfaced. A bad mother would have allowed them to continue abusing her. A bad mother wouldn't have taught the value of respect and consequences. Laura looked me straight in the eye. You are giving Paul the most important lesson of his life. Whether he learns it or not, that's up to him. At 5 o'clock on the dot, just as they promised, the 2 officers from yesterday arrived. They stood on the porch, a silent but firm presence. Are you ready? I asked Paul and Melanie, who were sitting on the couch surrounded by their belongings. We need more time, Melanie muttered. We haven't found an apartment yet. You had 24 hours, and before that you had 5 months. There was no negotiation in my voice. At 6 o'clock, you either leave voluntarily, or the officers will escort you out. Paul stood up slowly. It's fine, Mom. We get the point. We're going. He began carrying suitcases to the car parked in the driveway. Melanie followed him, shooting me murderous looks every time she passed me. But she said nothing. She had finally understood she had no power here. The process of moving all their things out took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of trips between the house and the car. 40 minutes of tense silence, broken only by the sound of suitcases being dragged and car doors opening and closing. At 5:45, everything was loaded. Paul's car was so full you could barely see out the back windows. Paul stood in front of me one last time. Mom, he began, but he couldn't finish. Go, Paul, and don't come back until you can look me in the eye and truly understand what you did to me. My voice was firm, but not cruel. He nodded, got in the car, and started the engine. Melanie was already in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead with a stone-faced expression. I watched them drive down the street until the car disappeared around the corner. And when I couldn't see them anymore, something inside me broke and reformed at the same time. The house fell into absolute silence when Paul's car disappeared from view. It was a different silence than the one I had lived with for the past 5 months. This wasn't a tense silence, heavy with hostility and resentment. This was a clean silence, empty of threats. It was the silence of a space that was finally mine again. The officers said goodbye with a professional handshake. Laura stayed with me that first night. We made tea, sat in the living room, and simply existed together in the quiet. I didn't need words. I just needed to know I wasn't completely alone in the world. How do you feel? Laura asked me when it was late at night. I don't know, I answered honestly. It's like I just came out of a storm. I'm exhausted but alive, aching but whole. That's normal. It's going to take you time to process all this. Laura sipped her tea slowly. But let me tell you something. The woman I saw today, standing up to her son and that viper of a daughter-in-law, that woman is much stronger than she was 6 months ago. She was right. Something had fundamentally changed inside me. I had discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed, an ability to set boundaries I had never exercised, a willingness to choose myself that had been dormant for decades. The first few days were strange. I'd wake up early out of habit, expecting to hear the sounds of other people in the house, but there was only silence. I made coffee just for myself. I ate breakfast at my own pace. I watched my TV shows at the volume I wanted. I walked through my house, rediscovering every corner. I went into the room Paul and Melanie had occupied. They had left it relatively clean, probably out of fear of legal consequences. I opened the windows wide, letting the fresh air sweep away any trace of their presence. During the first week, Paul called 3 times. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. He left voicemails that I listened to but didn't reply to. In the first, he sounded angry, accusing me of being cruel and inflexible. In the second, he sounded desperate, saying he and Melanie were in a cheap hotel and needed help. In the third, his voice finally sounded different, tired, defeated, maybe a little more mature. Mom, I know you don't want to talk to me, and I get it. I just want you to know that Melanie and I separated. She went to stay with her sister in another city, and I'm starting to see things clearly for the first time in a long time. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I finally understand what I did, and I'm going to live with that for the rest of my life. I saved that message. I don't know why. Maybe because it was the first time Paul sounded like the son I had raised, or maybe because I needed a reminder that people can change, even if it's too late. James came to visit me 2 weeks after the eviction. He brought documents for me to sign, updating my will and strengthening the legal security of my properties. "How are you, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked as we had coffee in my living room. "Better than I expected," I answered sincerely. I thought I would feel guilty all the time. I thought I'd regret it. But what I feel is relief. "That's good. It means you made the right decision." James smiled. "I've seen many cases like yours. Family abusing elders. Children who see their parents as walking bank accounts. The sad part is, many people never fight back. They're so afraid of being alone that they'd rather live in abuse. I was almost one of those people," I admitted. "If it hadn't been for Laura, for you, for that moment when I finally said enough, I'd still be a prisoner in my own home. But you're not. And that makes you extraordinary." James closed his briefcase. "Now, you are legally protected. Your will is updated. Paul receives nothing until you decide otherwise. And if you ever do decide to forgive him, you can change these documents. But in the meantime, everything is secure." A month after Paul left, I began to actively rebuild my life. I joined a needlepoint group at the local community center. I met other women my age, many of them with stories similar to mine. Women who had been underestimated, ignored, mistreated by their own families. Women who had found the strength to say no more. One of them, Maria Santos, who was 71 years old, became a close friend. She had gone through something similar with her daughter 10 years ago. "The first year is the hardest," she told me during one of our weekly coffee dates. "You doubt yourself constantly. You wonder if you were too harsh. But then, little by little, you start to remember who you were before they turned you into a victim. And that person you rediscover is beautiful." I also returned to my abandoned hobbies. Richard and I used to go dancing every Friday. When he died, I stopped because dancing alone seemed too sad. But now, 7 years later, I joined a dance class for seniors, and I discovered that dancing wasn't sad. It was liberating. I rediscovered my garden. I had neglected it during the months Paul and Melanie lived with me because I had no energy for anything but survival. Now I spent my mornings among the flowers Richard had planted, talking to him as if he could still hear me. I did it. Love. I defended myself. I wish you were here to see it. 3 months after the eviction, Paul showed up at my door. He didn't call first. He just rang the doorbell on a Saturday afternoon. Through the glass of the door, I could see he had lost weight. His hair was shorter. He looked older, more tired, but there was also something different in his posture. Something more humble. I didn't open the door right away. I stood on the other side, watching him, deciding if I was ready for this. He didn't press. He didn't ring again. He just waited. Finally, I opened the door, but left the screen door closed between us. A small but symbolic, physical barrier. "Hi, Mom." His voice was soft, almost fearful. "Paul." I didn't say hello back. I didn't welcome him. I just acknowledged his presence. "I know I have no right to be here. I know you probably don't want to see me, but I needed to try." He put his hands in his pockets. I've been going to therapy 3 times a week, trying to understand how I became the person I was, how I let Melanie manipulate me, how I could betray my own mother. "And what have you discovered?" I asked. No emotion in my voice. That I'm a coward. That I've always been a coward. That instead of facing my own failures, I blamed everyone else. My job, the economy, you. His voice cracked. "Especially you. I blamed you for being successful when I wasn't, for having your life together when mine was a disaster. And that made me resent you instead of admire you." The words were right. They were the words I had wanted to hear for months. But they were coming late. They were coming after so much damage. I'm glad you're working on yourself, Paul. I truly am. And I meant it sincerely. But that doesn't change what happened. It doesn't erase the things you said, the things you did, the things you allowed. I know. He nodded, tears starting to roll down his cheeks. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I came to tell you that you were right about everything, and that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve as a son, even if that means doing it from a distance.